The Tema oil refinery is a major state asset in the energy sector. The sleeping giant, nearly collapsed by incompetent management and corruption associated with most state-owned enterprises. It has sought approval of the Public Procurement Authority to lease its production assets to a private company, Torenco. Torenco, said to have no track record in the oil refinery business or petroleum business, set up in January of this year and fronted by people in government or associated with government, shall pay a cumulative rent of some $13 million a year or up to $17.2 million if it is able to refine 16.5 million barrels of oil a year. That's the refinery's full capacity. Torenco is supposed to invest $22 million to revamp the refinery for the 6-year lease. Civil society, especially Assin and Imani, cry smoke and mirrors. The deal reminds them of PDS, it seems to me. We examine the deal and the red flags raised by Imani and Assin. In the meantime, IPPs, independent power producers, who are owed nearly $2 billion, threatened a shutdown that would have resulted in doomsday if government did not pay at least 30% of the debts today. The IPP's chamber has just announced a suspension of the threatened shutdown. It says it has an offer of some payments from ECG to enable them continue operations in the interim, while discussions are held for a permanent resolution, failing which it will shut down its plants. We join the chamber to thank the Mines and Energy Committee of Parliament for this intervention for temporary relief, but very typical of this republic. Shall we be put in the state of fear and panic again or return to this discussion next week in darkness? James Jachi Kwesen has won what some describe as justice victory. His nomination in 2020 was challenged. The EC cleared him. It was again challenged when he was being sworn in as MP. He survived despite a court injunction. Then last year, the Apex Court restrained him from attending Parliament or holding himself as an MP. In May this year, the Apex Court nullified his election because he got a renunciation of citizenship certificate from Canada in November 2020, when he had filed his nomination in October 2020. A criminal prosecution was to impede his ability to campaign for a by-election on June 27. He was expected to lose the election, but he beat his opponent by an even wider margin than he did in December 2020. Some say this is victory against injustice and persecution. Some say the outcome foreshadows the 2024 elections. Let's find out shortly. I'm Samson Anyenini. We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. This is Newsfile. Welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And on Samson's stake, I say, lest we forget, cherish rule of law. As you may know, yesterday was the 41st anniversary of the abduction and gruesome murder of 3 judges and retired military officer Major Sam Akwa on June 30, 1982 by the PNDC military junta. And this is celebrated every year to remind us that we don't ever have to go back there. The victims were justices, as I mentioned, Major Sam Akwa, and Justices Frederick Opoku-Sarkodie, Cecilia Koranting-Ado, Kwejo Ejay Ejapong. They were picked up and taken to the Bundasi military range in Accra Plains and murdered, killed in cold blood, simply because some people disagreed with how they executed their job. So, the lesson is that in this democracy, we make sure that we never go this way. This democracy is to prevent us from getting to the situation where people in power, people who have the power of the gun and the uniform, can just get up anytime, and because they dislike you or they are grieved by something you have done or said, can end your life. The 1992 Constitution provides us the Bill of Rights in Chapter 5 to enjoy fundamental human rights, including speech. So I hear the criticism of the minority chief whip and some members in the opposition for whipping up sentiments against the judiciary, so to speak, that they are too critical of judges and particularly the Supreme Court, and appear to bastardize the Supreme Court. I prefer the criticism to, however rambunctious, to a situation where judges will be scared and afraid that they will be picked up and murdered. Of course, I agree that is the right thing to do, that if you have to criticize, you must criticize in context. You must point out the specific wrong you find in a judgment or the conduct of a judge, because they are humans. It's a human institution. And as we know, there are corrupt people in there. There are people who have no integrity in there, just like any human institution. So let's criticize, but criticize in a manner that promotes rather than destroys. Because once trust is completely lost in the judiciary, we are doomed. Because it is the last institution that stands to our defense and rescue when things go wrong. There are complaints. Judge Kwesi is being asked to attend court every day. Of course, people have a point to make and comparison to make. They ask, why? Has he killed someone? Has he stolen? The answer is no. So why is it that number one, whose business, illegal business, has led to many people, hundreds, in fact in the thousands, some have lost their lives, some are sick, can't afford to buy medicine just because of what he has brought upon them. The state is prosecuting him. How many years now? How often has he been in court? We hear he goes to court perhaps once in a month or twice in 2 times, or sometimes two months, and he has attended court perhaps once or not at all. So they are justified to ask those questions. But let's be reminded that we're better off with such a system that people can criticize even when they do not know the operations of the system, and will not be afraid, and that judges can also stand up and do what is right without being afraid. Just this week, some people who were put on trial for breaching COVID-19 laws have been set free. You know why? They've been set free by a court. They've been set free by a court because myself and a number of other people went to court under the auspices of the Fix Ghana movement, Fix the Country movement, and secured a judgment from the Supreme Court against the government, against the president's, Imposition of Restrictions Act. And since that has been struck down as unlawful, unconstitutional, people who are being tried under that law must be set free. So they are free. That is the rule of law. That is democracy. And we must cherish it. That will be my take. We'll take a break. We'll be right back to introduce my guest as we get into canvassing the Vex Matters for you this morning. Show, as always, is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Duraplus, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, Rufi Papa Fie, My Way Insurance, dial star 165 hash on MTN to join My Way today. Cherry Tree Properties, we develop spaces as though we were going to occupy them ourselves. Syntex Tanks, it's strong, it's tough. Flamingo Paints, simply superior. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile we put Ghana first. And my guest to help us, we'll begin very brief comments on the Assin North development, and then get to take care of bread and butter, because we know that we are likely to be plunged into doom. So actually today, what should have happened was that the IPPs would have shut down their plants. And what that would have meant was that you were most obviously not going to have power. But because they have suspended that, in the interim, we have power to work with and to use. So that is a very important matter. Also, there is the Tema oil refinery that is being rented out, its assets being rented out, so to speak, which is a matter that the CSOs, particularly the leading ones on the issue, ASEP and Imani Ghana, seem to say the deal reminds them of the botched PDS. Now, my guest, to begin with the first issue, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante is Director Programs and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana. Andrew Ejapa Mensah is MP 2nd and Deputy Minister for Energy. Alexander Kofi Mensah Mold is also here with us in the studio. You know him, formerly of the GNPC. Now, thank you very much for making time to join us in the studio. And welcome those of you joining us via Zoom. And the Assin story is a very interesting one. and James Jachi of the NDC won by 57.56% as against the NPP's candidates, who got 42.15%, and then another candidate, obviously the LPG, who won 0.29% of the vote. So let me begin with you, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni-Asante. To start with, there are people who are making all the permutations about this particular outcome, and they say this is a verdict against the Supreme Court and against the state that is seeking to persecute and do injustice to the Jachi, who, as we speak, his name has been expunged from the record of Parliament as having ever been an MP. Well, thankfully, he goes back once the EC takes the communication to the Speaker. He'll be sworn in again the second time, and his name will be restored.
Yeah, hello.
Yes,
good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Samson, can you hear me?
Clearly.
A very good morning to everybody and co-panelists today. Yes, I mean, it was. I was in Assin North myself. It was an interesting election. I think going into the election, there was sort of high stakes for both the MPP and the NDC, because this is the first sort of competitive seat that both parties were going to contest for after the 2020 election. And given that this particular seat has been swinging, for many years, and both parties, this was almost like a test of their popularity or their strength as well. That is on the face of it. It was almost some sort of an assessment of whether or not the MPP, with all the challenges that it has had with the economic crisis, with some of its political challenges, internal party challenges, and so on, looking ahead through the 2024 election, whether or not it could be united, it could be, it can signal that it is still very competitive and still able to win an election regardless of its track record since 2020. So I think it was high stakes for the MPP, but also for the NDC, which is seeing the 2024 election as basically something that is very winnable, and they will see themselves as having a big advantage given the challenges of the MPP. And they were the ones who were holding the seat. So a defeat would have really deflated its own sense of preparedness for the 2024 election and where the citizens were. But everybody, I mean, the logic in politics is that at the end, when you put all of that together, politics is very much local. And the kind of narratives that were being built, where if you were there in Assin about the sequencing and how he has been treated and all of those kinds of things were very, very persuasive, So despite the real sort of deep incumbency abuse, and I miss no words, that this was, there was a lot of incumbency abuse with all the development, overnight development works, and these were very extensive development works. I saw it myself, being in the constituency. All of those things, the inducements that
the people are actually alleging. The people are alleging that the heavy-duty machines that were, swamped the place for the purported development have all gone missing after the NPP lost. And we have actually heard an NPP, officer suggesting that the government should punish the people of Assin for being ungrateful, and that for not voting for them, they ought to be punished. So no development should be taken to their place.
Well, it's not his. It's not. He doesn't have any power. The Constitution doesn't allow that. So, and it shouldn't be coming from a member of the ruling party. That is not what parties are set up, to do, to discriminate and use the public's money to punish people. So I think that is very uncalled for.
That's the gentleman's understanding of the democracy. But are you surprised that he's not been condemned by his party, that is wrong? Because his party has issued a statement congratulating the NDC and Gyakye Singh. Even the president has also issued a statement congratulating Gyakye Singh, congratulating the NDC.
Yes. And that is what has to be done, because, and I'll come, when we get into the abuse of incumbency and vote buying and how to curb that, we can really talk about principles, because I think the parties and the parties of our Fourth Republic have a huge responsibility. If they don't understand the consequences and the continual persistence of these challenges, then they have to think again. But I mean, just to say that some of these things I haven't heard, whether the bulldozers have pulled out and so on, we can verify. But I mean, on election day, they were still working. So even on election day, you couldn't miss the fact that some of the roads, were still being done and all of that. But I mean, it's to say that, as I said, politics at the end was for me local. And even as I stood at one of the polling stations where the counting was going on, I could just hear the sentiments of the voters still repeating their pain that Mr. Gyakye Singh has been taking through these, ordeal in their view, and therefore they wanted him to win, to send a message to the government that they didn't like what was being done to him. And if you look at the results across the constituency, and it's a very interesting constituency for me, because it's probably the most diverse, in terms of the strengths of each party from electoral area to electoral area. Mr. Gyakye Singh actually performed very well in sort of strongholds of the MPP. Actually, he was competing very strongly in all of those, and that's what showed in his overall performance. And he did something similar in 2020, but I think even in this election in particular, it was quite surprising that he was very competitive in very strong MPP areas. So it means that the emotional factor and people's narrative around what they believe was his treatment was one that really, I think, played a strong role in his victory.
Well, what do you make of some of the statements coming from the people, the voters there? They were told by the ruling party that don't vote for Gyakye Singh because he's standing criminal prosecution and he could go to jail. In fact, there are some members of the NPP who did not say he could go to jail, who said that they are definite that he will go to jail, including lawyers within the NPP. And the president also made similar comments and said he's a potential candidate for jail, so don't vote for him. What do you make of what we heard overwhelmingly from the voters who suggest that, well, if he will go to jail, we don't care? And others say, well, if we vote him and he gets, as it were, convicted and sentenced, and he doesn't get to serve us, at least there will be another by-election. And we can see now that it takes by-elections for constituencies to get attention and development.
What? It's actually a sad sort of commentary, your latter point, but I'll come to that. I think that sentiment was a very strong sentiment. that they would, I mean, literally, as you said, and I heard a few women talking about it when I was standing during the counting, that they would vote for him so that if they want to jail him, they can jail him. One thing that was clear is that at the local level, this idea of a dual citizenship doesn't resonate. It couldn't be broken down in people's understanding of belonging, where somebody belongs and whether they are Ghanaian. So people were saying, well, the man has even buried his mother at his home. You know, they know the family. So if you say that he's not Ghanaian or doesn't come from here, what do you mean? So the law for which Alhaji Sekonde and others have, were prosecuted and all of that, it's obvious that, at a certain local level, people don't really appreciate the nuances of it. And it didn't penetrate because the way in which locals perceive these things about whether you belong. On the other hand, people felt Mr. Charles Opoku, even though he has been around and people know of him and so on, thought that he was just a recent, how do you say, he's just recently known as a person, of the community.
Right.
So as to who belongs, and sometimes the laws that we are applying at the national level and at a higher level, people have a completely different understanding, and that is why they were quite peeved that they felt that this was a persecution of the person. So I mean, the solution, right. And I think people have already said about it, that those rules have to be looked at again.
All right. Thank you. Hold on for us. We intend to be really very brief with this. And Kwesi won with 17,245 votes. That represents 57.56% of the valid votes cast, whilst Charles Opoku of the New Patriotic Party got 12,630, representing 42.15%, and then the Liberal Party's Sefanu Benis Enyonam got 87 votes, representing 0.29%. Now check this. In 2020, Gyakye Kwesi had, in 2020, he has 17,498 votes. That represented 55.21%, as against the NPP's candidate then, Abena Druwa Mensah, who had 14,193 votes, representing 44.79%. Yes, Mr. Mould, what do you, of course, you in the NDC, you have been very, jubilant about this. More particularly on the wake of the allegations, more particularly against the NPP, of vote buying. And I saw footages where you could see clearly, vote buying being done so openly with such impunity. There was one particular place I was watching this other network where they made sure that there was a certain house that before you vote, you go to that house before you come vote. And then when you are done, you go through that house before you go wherever you go. And the claims we understood was that people were going there to take money, so they come out and vote. And you also sort of swear or take an oath, so to speak, that you were going to vote for the candidate. I saw one footage where officers of the NPP had come, and then people rushed to the vehicle, were taking money. Some officials were involved. They were called by the TV station. They were asked, you were sharing money to the people on the day of voting. That is against the law. And they said, no, these people had come from long places and they are just sorting out their T&T. I don't know the last time the Electoral Commission make people vote in places that is so far from where they live that they have to be given TNT to vote?
Yes, this is something that we saw in Kumewu, so we were expecting it in Assin North, because Assin North was, Kumewu, they won the 2020 by, if you add the independent candidate who is an MPP member, they won it by over 90%, the parliamentary seat. And we won, we improved from 9% to about just over between 20 and 25%. And we saw what they were doing. We were surprised, some of us were really surprised at what they were doing in their stronghold. So we knew it was going to be even on the larger scale in Assin North, and it was expected. But first of all, we would like to congratulate the NDC leadership in the strength that they showed, supporting our candidate, James Kwesen, throughout his trials and throughout the election. And the support was overwhelming. The support was given from the top leadership of the party to the central region, who organized this election on behalf of Assin North. So I would like to say they did a very good job. They were very professional. And we also like to state that the Electoral Commission did a very professional job, especially the people at the polling stations. We were very impressed with what they did. And the police must be commended, and that we gave it to them.
Once you win, the Electoral Commission has done a good job.
No, I'm giving for, I was at the polling stations. I was one of the polling the agents there, so I saw it firsthand. I'm
just imagining that if things went the other way, the NDC would have raised accusations, and the EC perhaps may have been the first to take
Well, things went the other way in Kumewu. You didn't hear us say that, did you? We lost the election in Kumewu.
You're right about that.
So we did not say that. And I think institutions in this country must be devoid of politics. And we are not seeing it in many institutions, SOEs, judiciary. We're not seeing it in the in many areas, but particularly the areas that are supposed to regulate things for us. But the EC in Kumewu and in Assin North did a good job. That's my personal view, because I'm giving a first hand.
So I return with a quick one for all of you about what this victory represents. There are those who say it's a victory to spite the courts or to tell the courts that you are wrong. And some say it's a victory that tells you what should happen, what may happen in 2024. Is that bit an overstretch? Andrew Ejapamesa, MP Second D and Deputy Minister for Energy, joins us. Of course, the NDC too was accused of some level of vote buying, but you heard them say, we are not in power, so we can't afford much. So what? It's okay to be buying votes. It's a criminal conduct according to our law. So Ejapamesa, you were so sure that the people will not vote for someone who will be jailed. In your words, that you are sure that he will be jailed, and so on. So what happened?
Samson, good morning, and good morning to my co-panelist, my good friend Kojo. It's been a while, and then Alex as well. It's been a while since I came on your show. And good morning to our cherished viewers. Samson, I'm sure that you and I, based on our training, okay, which essentially is grounded on precedent, you can make reasonable inferences as to what is likely to happen when you are confronted with the same set of facts for which the court have had an opportunity to pronounce on. And so, following from the Abu Sekande case, where, amongst others, he was convicted of perjury, which essentially arose at the time that he deposed to a statutory declaration on filing his nominations that he owed allegiance to no other country other than Ghana. same set of facts that Mr. J.C. Kwesi is facing. And so on the strength of that, I am certain in my mind that when his criminal prosecution is concluded, unless of course he has any evidence in his defense, which really is in doubt, because the depositions were clear. I have a copy of my nomination forms here. I made a deposition before a judge to the facts and the truthfulness of the statements that were contained in my declaration. And the law is clear. I believe in Section 280 of the Criminal Offences Act. You make any such statements. And indeed, in the Statutory Declarations Act itself, there are criminal sanctions that follow. And so let's wait and see. But then I was expecting that.
Yeah, but I'm coming there.
Yeah.
I am sure that if the comments that you made and you repeat here, if they were made by someone else without the clout that you have, and perhaps not being on the side that you belong of the political divide, they'll be cited for contempt, and they.
I don't think so.
And they will be convicted for doing the trial, literally.
Not at all. I don't think so at all. And you and I know the rules that govern contempt. Yeah, there's a thin line between commentary that is had in the public domain and one that affects directly the outcome of a particular case. I'm saying that based on the set of facts that are contained in the Adamu Sakande case, I can draw a reasonable inference that that's likely to be the outcome of the case. I don't think that that is prejudicial at all, because if you relate to facts that have been established in a particular case.
Prejudicial means that you are judging the case. You are judging the case ahead of the court. And how else would you have judged the case ahead of the court when you say?
I'm not judging.
When you say with absolute certainty that you have no doubt whatsoever that he will be jailed because he has broken the law.
Of course, the facts speak to themselves. And I'm saying that based on the precedent in the Abu Sakande case, I can make a reasonable inference. That doesn't mean that my inference is what the court ought to, as it were, follow. The court is enjoined to follow the precedent and the rules and to come out with a decision as regards the evidence that is before it.
But Japa, let's be clear about the differences in the two cases. And
yes,
there are clear differences, are they not? In Adamu Dramani Sakande, he had not filed to renounce his citizenship at the time he picked nomination. Neither had he received a renunciation certificate before he was elected. And then by the time he was elected and sworn and he was a member of parliament, there was no any indication that he had attempted to renounce his citizenship of two other countries. In this gentleman's case, he had filed his renunciation before he filed his nominations. The Supreme Court only said that you filed the nominations before you got the certificate. You filed in October, and you got the certificate in November. So that's the only thing that we have, the only difference situation we have with you.
Well, so the offences under the Statutory Declarations Act, when does it kick in?
No, I'm saying that there's a difference to the extent that Adamu Dramani Sakande was in parliament.
I don't see the difference.
Was in parliament and traveling on documents that meant that he was not he was a citizen of other countries. This gentleman is not in the same situation.
In fact, I'm told that Mr. J.C. Kwesi actually traveled in February of 2020 on his Canadian passport.
No proof.
I'm told. I don't know for a fact.
Okay, that's a rumor. So let's
yeah, of course.
let's not deal with the rumor.
I'm saying that Samson, the point really is this. At the date that you make a deposition, you depose to a certain set of facts. And so whether you had applied, because obviously if you apply to University of Ghana and you haven't received your admission letter, you can't begin to attend lectures. Okay, you cannot claim to be.
But if I tendered, I think there are two different things. And hear me. If I resign from University of Ghana, the same example. Please listen. If I resign from University of Ghana and I have not received acceptance of my resignation, I am entitled to say I have resigned, and I'm not a member of University of Ghana.
The question then arises that will follow thereof is: are you required to receive acceptance of your resignation from University of Ghana before you cease to be a student of University of Ghana?
The question that follows logically again, the question that follows logically again is whether by what I have done, I have an intention to deceive anybody.
But of course, Samson,
yes,
of course, that has to be a matter that the court would interrogate. But I'm saying that if you look at the Statutory Declarations Act, you depose to a set of facts on a particular day. At the day and time that you made that deposition, were you a Canadian citizen or not? Your intention, as far as I'm concerned, to cease to be a Canadian citizen is immaterial.
Oh, but in criminal prosecution, you must prove the fact as in the act, and then you must prove the intention. And if there's a letter showing that, I have no intention, and to tell you a lie, is that not important?
Samson,
yes.
Samson, I'm saying that at the time that you depose to those set of facts, your intention is immaterial. You are saying that positively, that I have no allegiance to any other country other than Ghana. Was that the case?
Yes.
How was it the case?
There are people who swear allegiance to a country where they are not citizens of. Does that matter?
Well, let the court decide.
Okay. All right. So that's really where it belongs. The court must decide.
Absolutely.
But I thought that it was clear that for those of us who are lawyers, not to confuse the viewers and listeners when we say this is the same as Adamus Dramani Sakandi, because they are completely different. Yeah. All right.
Samson,
yes.
The offense of perjury.
Yep.
Okay, it's clear that on a particular time when you make depositions to a certain set of facts which you know to be false, you've committed an offense.
Yeah, you are lying on oath. And he says, I didn't lie on oath. I had applied to renounce.
If I had an intention
when I was challenged, the EC actually cleared me and said, you have not done anything wrong.
Well, let the court decide. We'll see.
Right. Thank you. Now, so the question is, you were so sure, once again, that you will win this. So what happened?
Oh, of course. I mean, the dynamics of every election is different. Kojo made the point about the local dynamics in Assin. And obviously, those of you who were on the ground and those of us who monitored on the media space clearly saw what was transpiring. Politics of lies, deception, falsehoods. You know, when you go out there and make comments to the effect that a candidate is being hounded out of parliament, if you like, because you need the numbers to pass some LGBTQ act, which you know to be false. Because I know the proponent of the bill includes a member of the MPP. I'm a member of the Parliamentary Committee on Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. We have interrogated the bill. We've done a report. Nobody is against the passage of that legislation that seeks to clarify, if you like, provisions in our existing law on same-sex relationships in this country. But of course, the sentiments of the people is what the NDC sought to play on, lying and all sorts of things. And it is what it is. But you see, Samson, Kojo also made the point about people not appreciating the nuances of the law. And in my own sober reflection, I don't think that the Supreme Court decision itself was far-reaching enough. Because this is the 8th parliament for which the court ruled that Mr. Jetty could not hold himself as a member of parliament. And that is election really was invalid. And so the Electoral Commission, based on that, then conducts an election, a by-election, in which this same individual is participating. How does that do to the decision of the Supreme Court?
His election was invalid because by October 2020, he had not received a renunciation certificate. But by November, he had received a renunciation certificate before he was elected in December, and he was sworn in.
At which time the process leading to the conduct of the 2020
by the Supreme Court ruling, if he had received the renunciation certificate in October, his election will be valid. So what's your argument?
So I'm saying that at the time that he obtained the renunciation certificate, the processes leading to the 2020 election had closed. And so he could not validly participate in that election for the 8th Parliament. So how then does he then turn around and participate in an election to replace that MP after he had been removed? Because what did that mean? Effectively,
interesting.
Is to render the decision of the Supreme Court.
Are we looking forward to another challenge? Are we looking forward to another challenge on this ground in the Supreme Court?
I'm just bringing this up so we can all think through it to see whether indeed.
So let's move away from this. Do you share with those who say this could be an indication of how 2024 will go?
I don't think so at all.
All right.
Because, like I said, and like Kojo pointed out, all elections are local. It's interesting how there's a clear distinction between now Kumewu not being a competitive election and that this one is the first competitive election. Then Alex draws the independent candidate, the vote that he obtained, and adds it to the MPP candidate and says that because they're all coming from the same stock, they got 90% and the NDC got 10. The truth of the matter is that there were 3 candidates that contested the election, one on the ticket of the New Patriotic Party, one independent, and one from the NDC in 2020. Each of them obtained the votes that they did. And I'm saying that really had no bearing whatsoever on the Kumewu by-election, which occasioned as a result of the untimely demise of my good friend Baswa. 2024 is going to be a completely different set of elections. My expectation is that, yes, the economic circumstances that we find ourselves in now is a challenge for us. But of course, we've seen the data that is coming out. Right. First quarter growth of 4.2% clearly is an economy that has begun the process of recovery. And by the end of the year, all things being equal, we'll be seeing clear positive growth indicators that would assure Ghanaians that the NPP, as always, is the best that can manage the affairs of this country and its economy going forward. And so I don't share the view that this is what is going to transpire in 2024 at all. But of course, we're a political party, and we ought to learn lessons from every election.
Right.
We ought to re-strategize if there are issues. We need to do comprehensive studies of what informed the decision in Assin.
Thank you.
And to draw that would inform our preparation for 2024.
Thank you very much. That's what the party, through your General Secretary, has urged, and the President has also urged, hoping that in 2024, Assin North will turn blue. Dr. Kojo Asante, obviously, if the NPP had won this morning, what they would have told us would be that, see how 2024 looks like. Unfortunately, they lost. And, they lost. And now the story is different. If the NDC had not won, they clearly won't like how it will be projected. Now that they have also won, they will also like to project it to 2024, as they have begun saying. What do you say, Dr. Asante?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are a long way from December 7, 2024. So there's still many things to be resolved. The NPP's own internal party primaries have to be resolved to know who is the candidate. that would, help assess the strengths of the candidates going into the election. So I think for me, this election, it does give the NDC some more confidence about its own sense of competitiveness going into the 2024 election. I think that, I don't think there's any lesson to be taken from, Assin North, is the MPP have to look at the way in which they, use incumbency advantage in elections. Because if you create a certain sense among the voters that, a sense of almost like impunity, I think it will backfire if that begin to reflect in many constituencies as the campaign rolls out. I mean, we've seen it before, even in 2016. It was on the other way around where, the MPP was seen as the one that was lacking the resources, and then you saw all of the pageantry and pomp with the NDC. That kind of narrative can completely undermine a campaign. And I think it showed in Assin North that when people feel that they are suffering, they are struggling, and they see money is being, given to and just spent willy-nilly, it becomes a problem. So I think for me, that's the extent to which I'll go in terms of its implications.
Yeah, what
I think we are a long way.
What are you going to do as civil society organizations, serious ones like yours, CDD, together with, I think, IDEC, you have been very critical about ensuring enforcement and compliance with the political laws and regulations. We know that this is what it is. Unless you find situations where the people involved can be said to belong to the party not in government, you are not going to see prosecutions happen. Prosecutions is a discretionary thing. It's a political decision that the regimes take. The law says you need the Attorney General's fiat to prosecute on election offences. Where the accusation is heavily tilted against the NPP, you clearly are not going to see any prosecution, but you must make sure that something happens.
No, I mean, for me, I've tried to impress on the special prosecutor who is charged with dealing with politically exposed persons to get into this space, because I really think it's not just about vote buying. I think it's vote selling and vote buying. So I think that just examples have to be set in terms of even the citizens who are also receiving the votes.
Okay.
But I think the tactics should include undercover, because you're not going to really get people coming forward, to say we are receiving cash.
Right.
So I think that you need to deploy investigators that go undercover.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante of the CDD. Yes, he was on the ground. Finally, with you in a minute, what can you say? Is it not too much of a stretch to suggest that this is an indication of how 2024 will go?
Well, we've had two by-elections in areas that are considered strong NPP areas. One is the Kumewu, and Assin North, prior to 2020, was an NPP stronghold. And what we have seen is very clear to us that the Assin North victory basically is a victory for truth and justice. Let's put that aside. The margin is what we should talk about. The increase in margin from just over 3,000 to close to 5,000. And that is a clear message by the people of Assin North, representing the people of Ghana. A very clear message talking about the hardships that this country is going through and what this government have plunged us in. Okay. However, if you also, we've also said that if we get a good referee if we get a fair, impartial referee, we've always said this, there will be less intimidation. But we saw intimidation in Assin North. There were buses, VIP buses that carried a lot of macho men, but the police were able to stop that. If we do have a fair, unbiased electoral commission and a diligent police force, there is no way that the MPP can win 2024.
All right.
Especially given the hardships this country is going through and the work that the NDC is doing.
Thank you very much. We will be taking a break here, and when we return, we'll find out how ECG and working with the government will make sure the IPPs are paid so that we don't get plunged into doomsday anytime soon. We'll be right back. Right. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. We're joined by Samuel Dubik Mahama, Managing Director of the Electricity Company of Ghana. A while ago, I was telling him how he's been harassing all of us to make sure that we don't owe any bills. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
So he joins Alex Mould, and we will also be joined by Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa. Ejapa Mesa takes leave of us briefly, but will join us again. I've seen your messages on the first issue, but let's relax them for a while. We'll return to them. So we went to sleep in fear and in panic that we will wake up to a doomsday situation. Nobody wants to go back ever to a period of doomsday in our lives where businesses, were hurt so badly and even human lives were lost, as we understand. But in the middle of the night, we got a statement from the Chamber of Independent Power Generators, Ghana, IPGG. And it said, the Chamber of Independent Power Producers of Ghana, IPPG, that's not reflective of your letterhead, is pleased to announce that following fruitful engagements with the Electricity Company of Ghana, ECG, the IPPs have agreed to keep operating their power plants after today, July 1, 2023. As part of the understanding reached, all the IPPs have received an offer of payments from ECG to enable them operate in the interim, thereby providing the government of Ghana and ECG the needed grace period. Note those words and phrases. It says in the interim, and then this is to offer them grace period to address the outstanding arrears in the energy sector and to meet their contractual obligation. The IPPs are optimistic that this agreement reached would help yield the desired outcome of providing a permanent solution to the energy sector debt, failing which, underlined, the IPPs will be left with no option, no other choice than to revert to their earlier decision to shut down without any further notice, that the next time, if they are compelled to shut down, they will not serve any notice. And they were thanking the chairman and ranking member of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Mines and Energy and the members of the committee for their timely intervention to ensure the fruitful engagements that were arrived at. Okay. They end by saying that the IPPs will individually remain actively engaged with the government of Ghana and ECG in order to address the outstanding financial issues. Right. So you are a savior, ECG. You are already going around because you don't have money. People have used your power. They are not paying. You have been going around shutting their power down and so on, and threatening prosecution for all the thieves in this town who have been stealing electricity. So how do you, promise to settle a debt of $1.73 billion?
So, where do I start? First of all, good morning once again.
Good morning.
I'd like to say a big thank you to the IPPs for the entire conversation. This conversation has been running for some time now, and some people might have thought that we were not doing anything, but in such situations, you horse trade. And the person who's giving you the deadline will drag it all the way to the deadline to see if he can get you to bend the knee. But I'm glad in the end we could work out something. ECG is seeing some level of growth now. It's seeing some changes in the way it's doing it's performing its duties. And through all of this, we believe strongly we can close a certain gap. There is evidence of that, and that's what we shared with the chamber. Through that, I don't want to go further because of some disclosure issues. We shared certain numbers with them for certain periods moving forward. So in effect, we've ring-fenced up to June debt. And we are trying to, as part of the World Bank conversation was, we would have to stay current moving forward. So we've ring-fenced that up to June, and then now we are going to make sure that from July going forward, we stay current based on some form of a negotiation that we had with them concerning how power is going to be dispatched and how the energy and capacity conversations have gone. So we have a very good working formula. Be that as may, let me clear this point. ECG is a unique company. It's unique because it cuts across 3 sections. At some point, the company is a social company. At some point, it's an operational issue. At some point, it's financial. So if you look at it from only a financial standpoint, great disservice. If you take each of them individually, great disservice. But the moment you're able to find a nice balance between the 3, where everybody understands their role, guess what? It will not even be about the money.
Okay.
Because now I can say they've understood me to some extent, so maybe I can brag. But imagine if somebody throws at you and says, hey, X, Y, and Z, we are not going to move from there, even if you show them what it is, then it's not going to work. But at least after what they saw, they now see the new trajectory of growth, the new understanding, and the transparency. So that's the buy-in for us to be able to move forward now.
So the statement that they have issued reflects the agreements that you have reached with them?
Yes, it does.
So what does in the interim mean? That you have offered payments to enable them operate in the interim, to provide you grace period
Speak them one
to
by one.
address the issues.
Let's speak them one by one. So
how long is interim?
Interim could become permanent because what we've agreed on for the framework moving forward means that I'm going to stay current. So if I'm current now every month, you're okay. You understand? Now, they use interim in two forms. The other one is because they are waiting to hear how the legacy debt issue is going to be addressed and what the formula or the style will be for us to talk and move forward. But in truth, nobody wants to keep spending not knowing where the money is coming from. That's why we agreed on the way forward now. And the way forward is comfortable for all of them. So we are in good shape.
Right. So they had demanded that if you don't put down 30% of the 1.7 billion, they were going to shut down. What have you given them?
Would you be surprised if I said we've not given them anything?
Okay, they say there's an offer of payments.
So the truth of the matter is this, and again, it's about conversations. When there's uncertainty, there's panic. So until you're able to let the person calm down, give them the level of certainty they need to operate, they will always be panicking. So we've agreed on numbers across board for everybody, and everybody knows what they have to do and get back to us by the middle of the week. And when they do that, whatever needs to be credited to them will be credited to them immediately.
If the impression was that they could not operate beyond today, if they hadn't received the money, what is the assurance of how long they can operate because you are going to pay them some money?
So you see, when you look at every generation mix, or you look at, let's say, for example, at 3 p.m. every day, I'm told the amount of power we need by the next day and what our peak period will be. Now, there's a merit dispatch order based on every plant. Now, how do you dispatch the plants? It's supposed to be like it's a variable mix. Cheapest one comes in, and then also what? The most efficient one also comes in. So you have to find a blend. So without them, what would then happen would be, you have to fall back on what you already have, like your hydros, see how much they can give you, and then, I'm just talking about a contingency plan, and then see how much shortfall you would have in Tema to add. But that to the side, we had always known that, look, it was uncertainty that was bringing this whole conversation. And how to clarify that uncertainty was the key conversation which we had to have. And we knew that after having that conversation, we will all be fine to move forward.
Right. So what's the road to the permanent solution without which they say they'll revert?
The permanent road is to make sure that the agreement we have now on the staying current stays in place, which the numbers are very realistic now, stays in place, and then also find a way to make sure that what we've agreed in the new framework agreements go forward. You understand? Look, if I hadn't occupied that chair, I would never have known that ECG or electricity purchases are seasonal. You think everybody uses electricity just like that, but your consumption at certain times of the year is not the same.
Okay.
So what I may give you today as money, I may give you $1 million at the end of this month. Around this time of the year, I might give you 200,000 or 100,000. That doesn't allow certainty for your lenders and your shareholders. Because between these 5 companies, guess what? The government has been downgraded. So until we find a way to put them on a flat something, which their lenders and their sponsors can look forward to and can plan and can budget against, we would always have that issue. So with what has been put in place now, I believe we just need to do our best to make it sacrosanct, make it stick, and moving forward, when we get to the point where we are consuming as to how we should be consuming and paying what we need to be paying realistically, we pay and then we should be fine.
All right. Thank you very much. So you've been listening to Dubik Mahama, who is the man responsible for the Electricity Company of Ghana, who has told you and has been at your premises, making sure that you are paying for the electricity that you consume and that you don't steal it. If you do, you will be imprisoned. What's your understanding, Alex, of what is going on, and does this give you assurance that we will not be back to this fear and panic and discussion?
We haven't gotten out of this fear and panic situation.
Okay.
So when you say we won't be back, I want you to add a pinch of salt there. I pity my brother here very much. I know what he's going through. He's in an industry where currently the minister is treating the whole industry like a department of the ministry. Let's go to the cash waterfall mechanism. The cash waterfall mechanism is supposed to be a mechanism where you don't touch. It's sacrosanct. You've agreed to pay a certain percentage to all the players in the value chain. And then, because you are hot, because you need money to buy fuel, because you need money to pay somebody who has some political influence somewhere, putting pressure on one of the entities, you stop the mechanism and you shift back to manual. From automatic, you go to manual. Financial institutions do not like that. Financial institutions control the industry. They control the payments, they control everything. I just want to put a caveat here. The 1.73 billion that the IPPs are talking about is not the only thing that is owed in this industry. ECG, through the cash waterfall mechanism, is supposed to be putting a certain amount on a monthly basis to meet payments. IPPs are paid $130, $140 million or so every month. GMPC also is paid something north of $50 million because they pay E&I about $50 million every month. GMPC currently owes its banks, Standard Chartered Bank and HSBC, close to $400 million. And they cannot cross the $400 million, although $500 million has been confirmed or supported by the World Bank. Because if they cross the $400 million, they have to dip into the reserve of $100 million, which has already been used and is depleted. So there is no $100 million reserve, which is required in the agreement with World Bank. So that means that Ghana government would have to cough up the money. And as such, GMPC owes E&I. From March, they haven't paid much. And by the way, they haven't actually paid them because they've drawn down on the LC. So GMPC owes these banks $400 million. GMPC also owes E&I 3 months of payments. What GMPC should be doing is GMPC should be collecting, a large amount of money from ECG to meet the payments. I don't know what the percentage is of the cash waterfall that goes to pay for the power, but it must be something close to 30 to 40%. But GMPC only received about 35% of what it should have received in 2022. And currently, they've only received 15% of what they need to receive. That means that we are talking about IPPs. There will be no fuel. There will be no fuel if this young man here doesn't ensure GMPC is paid. Now, his hands are tied because he's being told not to work with the cash waterfall, hold the cash waterfall, and use the money for other things. This whole sector is totally mismanaged.
How much of the total debt to ECG is owed by government, and how much of it is paid?
Right now, government doesn't owe ECG.
Okay.
Right now, government...
Why would government owe ECG?
Right now, government
owes ECG through its SOEs, Tema refinery, all the people who take electricity.
Government itself doesn't owe ECG.
So the question is, why would government owe ECG? Unless government has guaranteed to make certain payments for ECG, which is not in the budget, by the way, so they haven't guaranteed anything. Is that right?
That's correct. But let me...
No, but there are agencies that owe. He's been going around to collect.
Almost everybody is now fully paid now because I don't have
Rambo
friends.
style.
So I don't have friends. Let's be fair. I don't have friends because it beats my mind why you would consume something and not pay.
How much are the commercial losses of ECG?
As it stands now,
2022.
2022. Let's bring us to 2022. It ended at about 29%.
Commercial losses.
So now it's always combined. Commercial and technical are combined.
Let's move the technical out.
So I can only speak from when I started.
Okay.
One of the reasons why we went through all what we've gone through is because I was trying to plug commercial losses. Now, ECG is digitalized from end to end. Your purchase starts from no cashier takes cash in the office anymore. We've gone cashless. So it allows you to see the revenue as is. Now, secondly, where we are now as a company is when you're able to close such a gap, the next thing is to look at operationally and find out what the problem is. Tariff increment is not the solution to this problem, as we sit here.
It's one of the solutions.
It's not.
Without the tariff,
it is not.
But if you if you are not invoicing the amount you are consuming,
big bro,
you won't collect any money.
Big bro. Tariff increment now, as we speak, is not the solution. Tariff increment is like giving me a basket and asking me to go and fetch water.
No, I agree.
So you've increased tariff based on the IMF's advice and said that we should go and that it will show in what revenue. There are physical operational issues within ECG that have to be critically looked at.
Absolutely.
Because the cash waterfall was not growing.
Why?
But the operational issues are not being solved. How do you grow the pie? The base to grow the pie is ECG. So you might put together a fantastic plan, but until you sit down and look at the base and plug the holes in the base, you will never see the requisite growth.
That's absolutely true.
So what I then realized was, okay, let's look at our metering. Let me even start you off on customer numbers. Look, anybody who tells you this sector is not viable is a liar. It's a very viable sector, but our approach to business over the years, don't even bring government into it.
It's ECG.
Our approach to business over the years is what has brought us to where we are now. And we're not looking at a critical dynamic shift in how we do our business operations. After the last population and housing census, it says what? You have 8.5 million households in Ghana. My PMO division took them up. I gave them an assignment. They went through it, came back to me and said, the whole base where ECG sells power, ECG should have about 7 million customers, 7 point something. Our billing system says our total customer number is what? 4.5 million. It has been 4.5 before I joined ECG. It's still 4.5. Immediately you realize that what? There's a problem. So you now go to the system. And then you realize that the billing system of the company, the CMS, was given to us by the World Bank in 2015. It hasn't seen any substantial upgrade. It hasn't seen any work done to it. That system is in Oracle 9. It's in Oracle 9. They gave it to us, gave us, what do you call it, a consultant. And the system is in Oracle 9. Oracle is in 22.
And we haven't fired our IT people.
So to solve the problem, now you take a closer look at that. Now you try to upgrade the system. But people have been used to that and have found ways around it. So they're always resistant. But until you closed it, change the billing cycle, change everything for it to be moving at its optimum now, you start realizing that, revenue assurance is not there. Let's put revenue assurance in place. You put revenue assurance in place, you realize that, okay, now you have a graph that is showing. Now you can answer to how the graph is moving, because initially you were flying blind. Now I can tell you for a fact what is happening in every region, every district, just by the click of my phone now. That's how the company is now working.
Right.
Now let's go to those numbers. If 4.5 million is a blend of households and commercials, if you add, and they're saying 7, that 7 million is households. How many commercials are we missing? Let's say there are 4 million, just for argument's sake. Let's hold on to 2 million of those. That 2 million, we struck the averages of trying to implement a flat rate system because we don't have the meters.
Don't have the meters yet.
So what do you do when we did the flat rate system? In a month, an average home in an urban area, peri-urban area is 600 cedis. You understand? So now 600 by 2 million.
The median, you mean?
Yeah, the median, yeah. 600 by 2 million. What do you have? 1.2 billion Ghana cedis. Let's say the dollar to cedi is even 12. That's what? 100 million cedis. Sir, if we do not stop the blame game of dropping the ball at this one's doorstep, and let's have a proper approach holistically, nationally, to the company called ECG, we would always point fingers, and next week we will be here. I'm glad the way you started that we are not out. The first place we need to look at is the company ECG, and give it all the support we need to give it. And then when there's a gap realized, we can talk about that subsidy. Because right now, what is the subsidy? You have take or pay agreements that guarantees someone $18 million every month, whether you lift or you don't lift. $15 million, whether you lift or you don't lift. And then you hear, and then you sit down quietly, and then you, through media, I have tried very hard to keep quiet during this space. But you realize that you have so many experts who don't even understand what they are talking about because they've not had the opportunity to sit where I'm sitting.
I think they've not had the opportunity to receive the information. It's the lack of information that is causing people to maybe give you the wrong impression.
You can ask everybody. I am very approachable. and I do not hide the truth. Because I feel the job I have been given, if I want us to get out of this as quickly as possible, it's a national issue. We should drop the whole political commentary.
So what is stopping ECG from doing the things that you need to do to get this done?
We are now at the point where we are about to lift off. You have to prepare everything, getting it ready for liftoff.
So what have
now
we
we've
done?
prepared the whole flat rate system is ready. Now we need to find all those customers. Now the conversation is you can't consume at zero. You can't consume and not pay.
Yes. So you are giving electricity to a lot of people. For
Now
example,
we don't even know.
On my road, I have a lot of kiosks. They have electricity. I don't know how they got electricity.
Let me even tell you, we did a KIMS, I call it customer asset and mapping. We did Ebuakwa or Yarifa, and Ebuakwa, Adenta and Kwabenya. I found 54,000 new customers that I didn't know of.
But can't you tell from your transformer system, if you put a system in place, how much it is being consumed
Let me tell
in
you,
an area?
Do you know how number of transformers I even found on the network that have been energized and are on the network that are not on ECG's books? How private contractors energize networks with no recourse to ECG?
You are getting to understand your problem.
It's a national issue, and we need
Right, so as you watch, I have quietly just been watching them, and the interaction, I believe, has been very useful to you as well. This is Newsfile. Is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Duroplus, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duroplus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, roofing Papa Fie. My Way, dial *165# on MTN to join My Way today. Cherry Tree Properties, we develop spaces as though we're going to occupy them ourselves. Syntex tanks, it's strong, it's tough, and Flamingo paints, simply superior. And we are now joined by Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa. But before we hear him, he will do a quick, 5 minutes presentation on this issue, and we have a couple of questions for him. Then we'll move on to the next issues with him as well. But we'll take a break. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. My guest on this second segment, trying to be sure and to be sure of the assurance that we will not be plunging to doom so because the IPPs threatened to shut down their plants. And now they say they have suspended that decision temporarily, as in the interim, hoping for a permanent solution because they have been made offers of some of the payments. They are owed in excess of 1.7 billion US dollars, and they insisted that they need to get 30% of that. Otherwise, this morning would have been plunged into doom so. But thanks to the minority, it says the Mines and Energy Committee, who got an intervention with the ECG, they have suspended that decision in the meantime and giving them a grace period to resolve the issues. Alex Mould is here. Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa, joins us. Now, this is how Bright will give us his take. In the next 5 or 6 minutes, he would give us his perspective from where they sit at Imani, and then we would ask him 1 or 2 questions before we move on to the next issue, where he will do another such presentation. Then we ask him a few questions. Hello, Bright. Thank you so very much for making time to join us.
Thank you very much, Samson, for having me.
Right.
So with your permission, can I proceed to discuss the Assin North matter?
If we can begin with the IPPs and the threats which has now been suspended. We can go to Assin later on.
Okay, the way that I was advised in advance was to build up the connections between the three issues.
Okay, please go on. Please go on.
Go on. Okay, thank you. So regarding Assin North, I think the reason why this is interesting is that most of these issues that we are discussing, fascinatingly, have a very strong link to what we can expect in 2024 as far as the political fortunes of the MPP and the NDC are concerned. And while it may not be so, from the surface, I hope that in the conversations and in the presentation I'm about to make, those links will be apparent. The question is, of course, 2024 might present us with a reset. And the issue is pretty simple. Each of the parties have had 16 years now in the Fourth Republic, or at the very least by 2024, they will have had 16 years each. And we've had these 8-year cycles. Now, the question that is on everybody's mind is whether that 8-year cycle then is cast in stone or is due for a reset. We also have, of course, the very interesting situation of a former president returning. And that leads us to the question around how do we use the limited data we have of the 2 by-elections? And of course, that's a very small sample, and small samples are not often very useful for extrapolating to broader consequences. But that notwithstanding, we have enough information from the 2 by-elections to begin to build a kind of model. So we start off with Kumewu, and what you see from Kumewu on the screen is basically the 2016 election results and the 2020 election results. And that gives you a sense of what is the core base of each party. The information that is on the screen gives you a sense of what traditionally the MPP is able to secure in terms of votes.
And you see that right. Yeah. Forgive me, but I understand that you are sharing your screen so that we can all see it in bold print. Is that it?
Yes, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, thank you. Please go on.
Okay, so in essence, the MPP has roughly 22,000 thereabout. If you do a projection over time, and you look at, I'm only showing a few results because I don't have time. But if you do an analysis from 1996 onwards, you get a sense that the MPP's base, if you project it to today, is roughly in the region of about 22,000, versus the MPP base, which is something in the region of 3,500 to 4,000. So that's what is interesting. What is the core base? And then what swing dynamics you can look at from election to election. What was interesting in the case of the 2020 elections was that the MPP core was split because you had an insurgent from within the party, somebody from within the party who went independent. The truth of the matter is that that person was an MPP person through and through. And most of the people that will have gone with him in that split moment were MPP people. So in essence, you have an MPP core base that have been split into 2. And now we have a situation where in the latest by-election results, those MPP people that have gone to the independent candidate appear not to have voted, or we can assume that maybe they voted for someone else. The reason why we cannot assume that they voted for someone else is to look at the raw numbers. When you look at what the MPP candidate got, the MPP candidate got votes that were significantly lower from the usual trend of MPP votes. He lost about 7,000 of the core voters. You might argue that, well, that was a by-election, and typically by-elections have lower turnout. The truth is that it's not true that consistently by-elections have lower turnout. Sometimes they have lower turnout, sometimes they don't. The second issue is that even if you make provision for the possibility that some people did not vote because it's a by-election, you have to then account for why the NDC vote remained within the NDC long-term trend. So it's essentially how come NDC voters are not affected by the notion that it's a by-election and therefore usually turnout is smaller. Of course, overall turnout was not very encouraging, but that is easily and better explained by the fact that MPP voters more likely stayed home than NDC voters. And that fact is very significant because it shows that the NPP is losing some members of its core base, and that the NDC is maintaining a steady core base. When it comes to the swing voters, it's not too apparent from this particular by-election, but that important fact that you had a certain trend over a number of years within Kumewu in terms of how many people can be described as being forming part of the NPP core base. And then in this by-election, it turns out that a good number of them did not vote. We go into the Assin North trend, and it's the same analysis. You look at the voting patterns from 1996, and it gives you a sense of what is the core base of the MPP versus the NDC. But here, the difference is that it's a swing vote, a swing constituency. It's a place where both parties have in the past won elections. So that gives you an interesting dynamic around how will swing voters potentially behave in this election. And why is that important? I'll come to that in a second. What you do see, though, is that the NPP core votes have remained steady around the 15,000, 16,000 over the last couple of years. In the by-election, first, you have a very high turnout compared to the Kumawu by-election. That high turnout shows that the winning candidate managed not only to bring to the vote their core constituency, but they also brought the swing voters out. So that's an important point. The second thing that you also notice is that the NPP actually saw a slight reduction in their core base, and the NDC remained stable. What that is telling us quite clearly is that the NDC is not wowing the swing voters yet. That notwithstanding, their core base is turning out, and therefore they are sustaining their core base. The NPP, on the other hand, appears to be losing their core base in both elections, and that is very significant. However, because overall, Assin is a swing constituency overall, it shows that in swing constituencies, in these types of elections, you're going to get the mobilization effort leading to a lot more voters coming out because they are not sure if their party will win or not, and that is an interesting dynamic to watch. The last point I'll make in respect of the Assin North by-election and its connection to 2024 is that we have to go back and look at the research that has been conducted over the years about swing voter constituency patterns, swing voter patterns in this country. And one of the key things that you realize is that, yes, campaign activity is always very important. How you campaign, how you effectively you do it. And I think NPP in both constituencies seem to have outclassed the NDC when it comes to sheer campaign mobilization. Part of that, I think, is to do with better resource mobilization. They have more money. The challenge, though, is that swing constituencies tend to respond more to economic factors. And because they respond more to economic factors, and here I'm using Afrobarometer data to try and discern how the core versus the swing constituency dynamics tend to work, because they respond more to economic factors, if there are general economic conditions in the country that are negative, the incumbent party, in this case the NPP, will suffer regardless of how well it mobilizes. All of this tells us very clearly that the NPP should already start worrying. The trends that are coming up from the two by-elections are not too favorable, and some of that may be linked with massive disgruntlement and their grassroots, and to some extent the economic factors that are prevailing in the country. But I think the number one issue is that NPP, the strong core of the NPP, is beginning to waver. One reason being that NPP constituencies, over time, NPP has benefited more from the swing voting constituency in this country more than the NDC. So in those circumstances, as we have in the coming elections, where economic situations mean that swing voters are more concerned or are more anxious, the NPP might suffer a bit more than the NDC.
That's a very interesting examination there and a perspective that you have brought to bear on this. A perspective that I think many have not paid attention. There have been pollsters who have predicted, very terribly the outcome of the Assin North by-election. But this is a very, clear departure from that way of examining the issue. So I don't have a question for you on that. I need us to move on and to get to if we can address the matter of the IPPs and the ECG, what your views are on that first. But before that, let me just share some of the messages with some of our viewers on the first issue of Assin North with you. Jay Glyph, you may want to say something about that. Jay Glyph says, Ejapa Mesa on the altar of politics claims that proof of intention is immaterial in establishing perjury. This is shocking. State versus harm settled any doubt on the need to establish intention of deliberate knowledge of falsehood of the statement made. Ben Chase says the NPP is living in a fool's paradise. The Assin North result is a referendum on the Akufo-Addo-Bawumia government. Don Dream says, I love the people of Assin North. They spoke boldly, talked hard. They took the money, chopped it, and voted against them. The politicians must be spoken to very strongly through elections. They must be punished when they don't do our bidding. Then, when they don't do our bidding, then Gavivina says, it is the real reflection of the anger of the people. MPP and Akufo-Addo have no ideas the temperature of hardship in the country. Their own plan now is to steal more money through corruption, thinking of spreading money, and will win them 2024 elections. And then A. Nyema says what we are missing is that Assin North election is a glimpse of the power of the people versus the courts. The court. Thus, a revolt by the people always temporarily discards the law and imposes the will of the people, which should never be ignored. And this one doesn't identify himself, says that if Gyakye Quayson were an MPP member, the prosecution he is suffering and all that he has suffered, he would never have encountered them. And I agree with that. If Gyakye Quayson was in the MPP, he would never be standing trial. In the same way, if Gyakye Quayson was NDC and NPP was in power, he will be was MPP and NDC was in power, he will be prosecuted. That's funny how our politics works. Yes, you have anything to say about the comment before you move to your next issue? Because I don't have a question for you for Assin North.
Yes, Samson, I think, they reflect the views that we will expect. Don't forget, swing voters in this country are roughly about 20%. Their effect on the vote is about 10 to 15%. And so you cannot ignore the sentiments of swing voters. That notwithstanding, we also know from the results that the core partisan base is the top, is the top predictor of how elections pan out, in the sense that we saw how an independent candidate completely unraveled when partisan voters eventually had to make a choice. They decided to stay home rather than to go out and vote for the opposition. So these are interesting dynamics.
Okay, so now let's go to what you call the fear of Dumso. And then Dubik Mahama is here so that once you are done, if he has a question or two, he may make an intervention before he takes leave of us. And then you and then Alex Mould and Ejapa Mensah will deal with the issue of the Torenko lease saga. So let's hear you.
Thank you. So, the issue is that I don't know what has been discussed before I joined, so I'm still going to give you a very short kind of overview of where we are as a country with regard to energy. And the key graphs are on the page. We've shifted primarily from a hydro energy system or a hydro energy mix to a primarily thermal and hydro mix. So in recent years, we get into situations where up to 70% of all our energy needs are met by thermal. The other important fact, what the graph is showing is that until sometime around 1997, 1998, almost all the power in this country was generated by hydro, basically Akusombo and Akuse dams, and now we have Bui.
That's right.
Then over time, we started to use more gas, LPO, and different types of liquid fuels to try LCO and different types of different types of thermal fuels to try and shift and diversify and improve the resilience. The interesting thing is that when that happened, private investment became much more important for simple reasons. Most private companies don't really like the hydro space. So there are not many places in the world where you see a lot of private investment into hydro. Thermal is much more modular, easier to modulate your output depending on how things are turning out, etc., etc. In simple terms, we now have a situation where the private sector is almost responsible for about half of total production, almost half. And that has also meant, so we had a time in the early 2000s where VRA, for instance, was responsible for almost 90-something%, either directly or through joint ventures. And now we have a situation where private companies are putting a lot of money into our power sector. So that is basically the context we find ourselves in. The second important context, and I also don't know how much of this has been discussed, but seeing the eminence of your guest, I presume they've delved into this already. But we've had situations where reforms keep failing. So there are dynamics around how usually when you decide to reform your power sector and you look at the entire value chain and you try and optimize the entire value chain, there are certain things that you ought to do. And even though we've tried to do them and we know what has to be done, we are not able to execute. Partly because, or I would say predominantly because, the political class is not ready yet. The politicians feel that the time that they have in power, the 4-year cycle, is just not really sufficient for them to think very long term. So if they can muddle through every 4 years and somehow get it going, they will do it. So their goal is not really to fix the system properly. Their goal is to patch it up, use Band-Aid, and keep the thing going as much as they can. And then when the next government comes, you come and take on. So that has been the problem. There are massive changes that we ought to be making in the system, where we have a situation where we have a mixed ownership when it comes to generation. So when it comes to actually producing the power, there's private sector, there's public sector. When it comes to distribution and transmission, we have almost entirely public sector. And then when it comes to accountability for the losses, is almost entirely within the public sector. That is not sustainable. You need to create situations where there are incentives to actually cut losses. And no matter what the very honorable and very eminent managing director for ECG may have said, and I presume, I haven't listened to him, but I presume he will have defended his position with great enthusiasm. No matter what it is that he might have said, the truth is most of the problems that we are facing are fundamentally as ECG. It's in the distribution, it's in the collections, it's in the retail segment, more so than the generation. Though there are a lot of problems also in the generation. But and I'll come to that in a second if we have time. But the ECG is the big problem. And we've seen an attempt to introduce private sector participation in ECG, and that has flopped completely with PBS. But their losses have continued to rise over time. And even though they've made some improvement in some years, like in 2015, 2016, much of that was generally because they were not producing a lot. And therefore, they were not producing enough, and therefore they were not selling a loss. As soon as production started to pick up again, we saw that the losses started to mount, hitting almost 35%. Then the World Bank introduced this idea of well, it's not the World Bank, the reformers introduced this idea of the cash waterfall mechanism. But we signed agreements with the likes of the World Bank, which require, therefore, that the cash waterfall mechanism be implemented and be implemented. What does it mean? It means that there are multiple actors in the value chain. There are different companies that do different things. And typically, the challenge has been that because of poor optimization, this one owes this one owes this one. There's a lot of confusion. So the idea was, how do we create a mechanism that allows the money that is coming in to be pooled? And then we don't wait a situation where Gridco gets nothing at all, but VRA gets something, the IPPs get something, maybe Ghana Gas gets nothing, and that kind of confusion. So we have a single pool. Typically, the ECG puts the money in an escrow because it's at the tail end. It generates most of the retail volume. And then that money gets distributed proportionately. Also, the other dynamic was that it gets distributed based on the most expensive debt first, so that we don't accumulate debt over time. So those were some of it's very complex, and I cannot explain it in a 6-minute conversation. But the key idea was we try to create a mechanism that will ensure that we are not creating distortions in the value chain. Unfortunately, that situation is not working. That really is where we are now. Because if the money that is being collected, people pay electricity bills in Ghana. If that money was being collected effectively, and that money was being applied to the cash waterfall mechanism, we wouldn't have the situation we have now, where consistently there's no money to pay the people that are producing the power. Where is the money that is being generated in the system going? That's a simple question. Recently, the ECG said the big problem was that people are not paying, so it went on a revenue drive, mobilization drive, and in the effort of through the effort of having done that, it said it has mobilized 3.1 billion out of 5.7 billion that it was owed. Two questions are immediately apparent. The first question is that if it's just 5.7 billion that is outstanding, and probably it's more by now because this is a few months ago, then that is not enough to pay the IPPs, the $1.7 billion. So there's some other value chain problems, regardless of what we do at the ECG end, which is important. The second is that beyond the fact that 5.7 billion, if you collected all of it and raised about $450 million or so thereabouts, you'll not be able to pay the $1.7 billion. In spite of that fact, we also have the issue that the 3.1 billion has not been remitted through the cash waterfall mechanism. The 3.1 billion that they claim they've mobilized, which is more than $250 million. Because if we've seen that money and we pass that through, at least the IPPs would have got a bit more money in the last quarter. I'm looking at some of the dynamics around the actual recovery rates. And if you ask VRA, they tell you that they get about 40% or 45% of their invoices. If you ask others in the value chain like Ghana Gas and the rest, they say they are not being paid at all. So the cash waterfall mechanism is not working at all. The recovery rate still, for most of the invoices that are being paid, is under 50%. So essentially, if we generate power or we transmit power or we distribute power, whatever it is that we are doing in that value chain, when we submit our invoices to whoever it is that we are supposed to submit our invoices to, the actual money that is coming back is often less than half of what it is that we built. So over the years, this keeps compiling. It keeps compiling. And then we face the issues of overcapacity. And it's because, we signed these take-or-pay contracts. And because we signed these take-and-pay contracts, what we have is a situation where whether or not we are consuming the power, we are still paying. That has some contribution, but it's not everything. It's not everything because even the state-owned companies who sell to other state-owned companies or elsewhere don't also get paid. So it can't be that, unless you are saying that they are also doing take-and-pay contracts. They are not doing take-and-pay contracts. So VRA, why is VRA not able to piling up receivables? Why is Bui Power piling up receivables? Bui Power claims that from around 2018, They had $300 million in receivables, which means that was money ECG should have paid them. They say it's now getting to $700 million. Is that take or pay? Where is that $400 million? Why have they not paid that? So clearly there's a problem across the entire value chain at multiple levels.
Right.
If you look at Ghana Gas, similar problems. So we cannot blame overcapacity alone, even though it has contributed something to it. Secondly, even if it's overcapacity, why then do we not reduce the amount of power we produce through those producers that we control? Why is Big Power still producing at the current volume that it's producing at, or VRA? Because if you have more from the private sector, it's too expensive, and until you can amend the agreements to reduce that output, then you have to start reducing the output from those that you control. So I don't buy the overcapacity issue. The key point is that every time we've had financial crisis, it's also been interlocked with a power crisis. And you can go as far back as you can. This on the screen, you see a number of instances where we get a debt crisis, then a fiscal crisis, then a power crisis, then a banking crisis, and it follows and follows and follows. And that situation is why I think all the issues we are discussing today are connected, because the truth is the lack of the power crisis has often been intertwined with massive political effects. So in the 1997, 1998, 1999 period, we had a power crisis, the government changed. We saw the same in 2007, 2008, the government changed, and we saw the same in 2015, 2016, and the government changed. So the government has to take this really seriously. The power crisis is almost like the crown of all the other crises as they compound, and often the political effects are dramatic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as we understand, now we have a hydro component of 38%, and then the thermal component is a whopping 61%. So the IPPs control such a huge chunk of the power that we need, isn't it? Listening to him.
I think you have to correct a notion that he brought up before you even asked me to talk. He said he didn't listen, but he had a slide that said ECG is what broke it. And he said, I might have defended. Did I defend that position? I didn't.
Okay.
You actually agree with him?
Look, is he still on?
Yeah, he's on.
I've never met him before. But my first question to him is, did he call me to ask my opinion? Did he, by any way, interact with us at ECG?
He's speaking to the data.
Yeah, but you see, sometimes data has certain components of it that will not be shared.
Imani works with ASEP and all of the others that you deal with. So together...
ASEP hasn't spoken to me. I said something earlier. I am so approachable to a fault that whatever information you need for you to get to a certain conclusion, I am available for it.
So that's a minor
So
point.
yes, so if you see the 3.1, there's a structure to every stupidity, or there's a structure to every madness. 3.1 billion. This was the same vein where we've had so many conversations about it. 70 million of that party, there was a planned shutdown. That didn't happen. Okay? There was a maintenance job that was going on by one of our parties within the food chain. So there was going to be a shortage in fuel. So when you sit in a certain chair, there's the good way to do things, and there's the very operational way to do things, and there's a social impact and a financial impact. I started by telling you that.
Yes, right.
You are caught with having power plants sitting down but not having fuel because there was no proper planning. So because of that, what do? Do you have to go ahead and pay people what they are due so that the cost of unsold energy in this country is one of our big problems? But God, energy you've sold that you are not recovering, that gap, if that gap is closed, I must admit, yes, they didn't see that 3.1. But again, that was another conversation I had with the Chamber of IPPs yesterday. I said, none of you bothered to come to me on that issue of the revenue mobilization. Even the Parliamentary Select Committee, nobody has actually even bothered, but everybody keeps churning out figures. Everybody keeps saying something.
So that's a good point to bringing the question I was bringing to. That is it. So starting with Bright, is it even feasible? is it something we can contemplate that the IPPs can collectively shut down over debt? Is it possible?
Yeah, of course. They have to give you
61% thermal, that's what we are consuming now, and 38%, hydro, which means now we are basically thermal driven, so to speak. Yes, Bright.
Yes. I think first point is that the CEO of ECG has also not reached out. I don't know why he thinks we are the only ones who must reach out. It's a community, right? It's a community. We all say we are interested in Ghana's well-being. So if he thinks he has information that will enhance the analysis, those people that do analysis for public consumption, he can also reach out to them and say, look, I know you are stakeholders in this environment. I don't have time to reach everyone. You often do that for public education. So because you do public education, I want to make sure that you are aware and you are fully armed with all the facts. And you can convene and you can reach out, and he also has not done it. Okay. So I will also say that he's never reached me before. I've never met him before. He's never sent me a
I think that's a minor reference. So can we?
Okay, I know, but I thought it was important that it's not, the impression is not created that we are, somehow trying to undermine his goals and his vision.
Right.
The second thing is that yes, the IPPs, if they were to shut down, and they could shut down on base of force majeure, which people are forgetting. They can simply say they don't have money to operate, and nothing in their contracts can stop them if they just literally run out of money to operate.
Yes.
So force majeure is one area in which people are not paying attention. The second thing is that if the IPPs want to turn off their power plants because of contractual breaches, then they don't have a case, because the contractual breach, the mechanism for dealing with contractual breaches is different. Right? The mechanism for dealing with contractual breaches, we want to call on the guarantee for all the other mediation clauses, etc., to be responded to, and the likes of it. So if they are if the reason why they wanted to turn it off, they wanted to turn on the plans, was because of contractual breaches, then they might have some legal challenges. But if they say that they've run out of money, their suppliers have come in and they have those challenges, and therefore they can't operate it, then there are force majeure reasons, to my mind. And of course, lawyers may disagree whether or not, not being paid and therefore not having money to run the machine is a force majeure incident. But we should not underestimate that. So those are my initial comments. One being that we have to have a sense in which public education is the commitment of all of us, not just some people. And then we have to reach out to state bodies and public agencies if we want information. The second thing is that, yes, there are legal constraints on the ability of the IPPs to just simply pop out of agreements if they are not happy, because there are processes in their contracts, the power purchase agreement, another contract that require them to follow a certain path. But the critical matter is that if they cannot operate because they don't have money, you cannot force a company to continue to sell something that they can't produce because they don't have money, because you're not paying them. So there are those dynamics that we need to pay attention to.
Okay, all right. So do you share the view that Bright has, when I asked the question whether it is possible that we can think about that ever happening? I saw you nodding.
It's a financial issue. I mean, the banks will clamp down on the IPPs, and they have to clamp down on who they owe. And I mentioned this earlier. This power sector is being treated like a department of the ministry, and it's as if there are no contracts. It's as if we don't want to abide by the contracts, and default is the norm in this country, and if we can't pay, we can't pay.
Okay.
The issues we have, I think, are very simple. We need to understand the economics. IPPs get paid about $130 to $140 million a month. They need to be paid that. This is their bill to ECG. The fuel we use is about $50 million also. We need to pay that to GMPC to pay ENI directly. And we need to also pay Tolo about $2 million a month, and WAPCO for the reverse flow about $8 million a month. So the numbers are the numbers. That's $200 million. That's this guy's problem. Now, he also has his operation expenses, ECG. I don't know how much it is, but I should guess it's about $40 million. About $30 million a month, or $40 million a month. Sorry, 40 million CDs a month. He does CDs. So if you add all of that, we're talking about about 2.4 billion Ghana cedis at an exchange rate of 12. I don't know what the exchange rate is today, but I don't know what is in the tariff, and that's why I disagree with my friend here. The tariff is very important. If the exchange rate in the tariff is 9 and the current price is 12, no matter what, if he closes all the gaps and he gets all his money, he still won't be able to pay. So PURC, let us do the right thing. If we want to charge the citizens less than what is supposed to be charged, government should subsidize it and put it in the budget.
All right.
The problem we have is he's only collecting 200 million cedis a week. That's 800 million cedis a month. He should be collecting at least 2.6 billion. He should more than double what he's collecting. And he's nowhere near there. So this problem is not going anywhere. Okay. And if I am a financial person who have supported the IPPs, I will pull the plug because government has to do the right thing.
Okay. That's why Mahama needs all the help that he can get from all of us.
Can I say something?
Yes.
You mean this Mahama?
Yes.
Okay.
So he needs to say something briefly and then he will take leave of us. And then we'll get to Torenko. And Torenko, that smells like a PDF to some of our PDS, to some of our civil society who have studied the situation. Yes, so I understand. Bright was saying they can shut down on the basis of, force majeure. I don't know it to be force majeure, whether it to be frustration as a legal principle.
Yes.
But there is no contract that will force you to keep, the power on when the money you need to keep it on is not there.
Yeah.
So I've heard those who are arguing that because of their contract, they can never shut down. It doesn't work that way. Yes.
So nobody will say, the thing is that you cannot be forced to be in a contract that you don't even want to be
That's
in
right.
the first place. That's the thing by law. But what I need us to clarify here is, even the graphs he gave was up to 2019. I'll be very honest with you, most of them are outdated. So we need to have a proper sit down. And I do keep in touch with Ben Boachi and Co. and Kofi Bentel and Co. Where we sit down and we have a chat as to what we are doing, how we are doing. So I'll do my best to reach out to him after this exercise. So I'll let Kofi reach him and then we can have a chat. Now the conversation is, my other brother here did something that was very smart about the conversation about tariff because I fought him on tariff. Later on, we had an understanding where I pointed out to him that it's a forex issue. Now, the truth of the matter is this. It's a numbers game. Whether you like it or not, it's a numbers game. If you have people you do not know that are consuming, less number of people will be paying for a larger number of people. There's a possibility that what we are doing now, a less number is paying for everybody. So there's an exercise that we are about to embark on that will then treat everybody. There's a flat rate policy, and we are coming out, we are tagging, we are counting, because at the end of the day, if you ask me how many meters we need now, it will be estimates. Okay. We need to get to the bottom of that. We need to find out what the real numbers are, come back to the good people of Ghana and say, this is the real number, this is the shortfall, we can't sustain it. What do we do? So we find a proper way to address it, because funny enough, the Great Impact Assessment is saying that in the next 4 to 5 years, we have to double our capacity again because of the way Ghanaians are chewing up electricity. So it's a national issue, as I keep saying. We need to sit down, look at what we have now, how to better what we have, find out why people are not paying, put them on these flat rates, and close the gap. Again, I'll repeat, it's operational, and everybody should help us because we will be coming.
Yeah.
The easy way is that they have been increasing tariffs because of that.
Explain this to me. My layman, I don't understand. When we say we are paying for excess, capacity, is it? And yet we are lacking. I don't understand that.
It's confusing. And like I said, nobody has brought out the numbers to show who has actually been paid this excess capacity. They bring to us and say, we pay for fuel. We paid for that. If you use fuel, it's not excess capacity. You've used the thing. So all we want government to do is come out clean. The other thing is the cash waterfall mechanism is a black box. It's just like how you make sausages. Nobody knows what goes into it. Nobody, even this young man sitting, he doesn't know what goes into it. And if we don't have a mechanism that is fair to all the players in this sector, how will a bank finance you? And when we are talking about take or pay, no financial institution is going to finance an IPP $350 million without a surety that they will be paid back. And that is why you have take or pay. So when the government comes out to say that we are cancelling the take or pay, it's rhetoric. They don't know what they are talking about.
All right.
Take or pay is important. We do. However, they may have too many plans they have signed
Right.
up.
Remember, we have to go to Torenko now. So thank you very much. And thank you, Dwight Mahama. Frank Anderson Jr. says that you are doing a good job. And if we had just 10 of your kind, Ghanaian SOEs will be doing very well. However, he says stakeholders need not speak to Mahama to obtain information. It is in his own interest and intrinsic of good governance to publish periodic information as part of his responsibility as a public servant. He's a busy man and shouldn't expect every stakeholder to reach out for information. Thank you very much. Now, Bright, we go back to Bright, and then we start the discussion on Torenko with Bright Simmons. As you heard in my introduction, if you are just joining us and you missed the point on that, as you heard in my introduction, the Tema oil refinery, basically government, is seeking the approval of the PPA, that's a Public Procurement Authority, to lease its production assets to private company. The company is known as Torenko. Torenko is said to have no track record in the petroleum or refinery industry. It was formed only in January, as ASEP tells us, and it is fronted by people in government or associated with the government, and it is supposed to do this, take over this state asset and do the refinery. If it does, it is going to be paying an annual rent to the to Tor in a little in excess of 13 million US dollars. It is supposed to, as it were, invest $22 million to revamp the refinery to be able to do this 6 years contract that it is seeking. Well, the government or Tor says this is a good thing that they are in and trying to get, but they have not clinched it yet. ASEP and Imani cry smoke and mirrors. And as I said earlier, the deal appears to remind them of PDS. So how do we know the truth? So we want to examine the red flags that have been raised by these CSOs. We start with Bright Simmons. Hello, Bright.
Thank you, Samson. Not to relitigate the ECG issue, but we have to leave your viewers under no confusion. Over the last couple of months, in the last couple of years, the situation as far as ECG's ability to remit back into the cash waterfall mechanism so everybody else can get paid has been getting worse. How much they're actually putting in, how much invoices are being paid, have been getting worse. We have situations where in some months they don't even remit 25% of invoice value. So that is the facts. Okay, respect of Tor, we have to, like usual, start with some framing, some contextual framing, some context. So we start off with the history of Tor itself. And Tor was set up in the 1960s, in 1963. And at that time, Ghana didn't have capacity in this area. So foreign investors from Italy, primarily the same company that today is called ENI or ENI, came over, and the government allowed them on a strategic basis to set up the refinery, own it, and operate it. So at that time, Tor was 100% owned by foreign investors in Ghana in 1963. In the 1970s, as you know, we tried to revamp Nkrumahism and other such, national ideological projects. And one of the things that we thought was important was that the government has to own critical industries. So in the middle of 1970, we started that process. By 1977, Tor had more or less been nationalized, and the government of Ghana now owned it. Most of the problems then started because obviously, if you don't have the working capital, you don't have the technology capacity, you are going to begin to start having challenges. And by 1989, there's been a number of shutdowns and a number of problems. So the government began a reform program and renamed the Tema refinery in 1991. And then since then, there's been an attempt to try and fix Tor's problems. Those problems manifest primarily in the area of money to actually operate the refinery, money to buy crude, and technical capacity to ensure that we are maintaining efficiency in production. When you put in some crude oil, you get out the right amount of refined products that you are looking for to do. So we started to borrow money to try and achieve this. And in the 1990s, we went to South Korea. We got about $200 million. That allowed us to expand the capacity a little bit to about 45,000 barrels. We then went, after the government lost power, the new government also, because Thor is a recurring problem, attempted to fix the issues and went back to the South Koreans because we knew them. Samsung came on board. We managed to get export tax credit and the like, export credits and the likes in South Korea. And we spent another $230 million roughly revamping the CDU and building a new model that allows you to extract some of the refined items that sometimes Thor doesn't generate well enough. By the time this new government came in and started this latest attempt to revamp the refinery, the debt build-up was around $300 million. So in 2003, they introduced a levy, a special levy, to try and clear the debt. And in trying to clear that debt, they created conditions in which, to my mind, we postponed some of the solutions that we ought to have implemented from the outset. And one of them is that we have a situation where that refinery, to a certain extent, is not efficient by design. And so even when we spent all that money that I mentioned to you in the early 2000s to try and reform it and to revamp it, plant utilization, how much of the entire plant capacity is being utilized. So if, for instance, the plant can generate 100 gallons of petrol, it normally does a lot more aviation fuel and things like that, but let's assume it's petrol. If it's 100 gallons of petrol, in actual fact, because of all manner of reasons, it will be doing maybe 20. Some of that could be due to the fact that they don't have crude, etc., but a lot of the time it's also because of technical capacity itself. And so you see that it's only in 2004 that we got close to something in the region of about 80% of plant utilization. And then it was downhill since then, until we shut down in 2021, April, because the management felt that the approach, the business model that was being operated was at that time making things worse. And that business model was that because nobody would lend Thor money, because Thor couldn't achieve enough revenue so that it can buy its own crude or go to the bank and get an overdraft to buy crude, it started to do a tolling operation. If you have your crude, you bring it, we refine it, we give you the product back, and you pay us for every barrel that we refine. The problem was that sometimes, when they refine it, the promised amount of refined output is not what they generate. And so they begin to build new set of losses. And so the feeling was that the amount of money that ought to be paid also has to be higher. It was about $2.5. And the management at that time felt, something like $4.5 per barrel would be reasonable. So they shut it down. They canceled the contract with Woodfields. And then we've literally not been able to turn it back on again because we can't seem to make progress. The other thing that has also become very associated with the Thor story is this tendency for shady things to happen at Thor. Products get missing. People bring bunkered oil from somewhere, or the complaints that bunkered oil is being brought from somewhere, or off-spec, which means crude that does not meet the specifications of Thor gets dumped in the refinery. There have been so many problems where we've had national security try and investigate, and it's a mess. It's a true mess. The last point in terms of where have we come from is that we've announced bailouts over and over again. The last major one was sometime in, I think, 2012, when we said, BNP Paribas and a bunch of banks were going to come together and give Thor $900 million. But pay attention to the numbers I'm mentioning, because all the time I'm mentioning these numbers for a reason. It gives you a sense of the scale of the problem, given what others have looked at and what they felt, was required in terms of money to try and fix the problem. So last time they said, okay, $900 million was going to come in and that was going to give Thor a lease of life. In simple terms, Thor's problems are primarily twofold. It's very broke and it's very untrusted for all the reasons that I've discussed. We've spent in the last couple of years, maybe the last less than a decade, we've generated almost $1 billion in various levies, from the original Thor levy to the component in the ESLA, the energy sector levy that we now dedicate to Thor. We've generated over $1 billion. All of those taxes, instead of going to Thor directly to clear the debt, expand the refinery, introduce management reform so the government stops appointing cronies whenever it feels like, having a truly independent board, by either passing regulations that literally prevent the president from intervening and prevent ministers from intervening. We've refused to do any of those things, right? So what has happened is that everybody doesn't trust Thor. Ghana Commercial Bank nearly collapsed because of Tor. The government had to find $300 million and build Ghana Commercial Bank
That's
out
right.
a decade ago. We have a situation where fundamentally, therefore, Tor is not trusted by anyone. Now, the question that you must ask is, will the Torinco deal address those two fundamental issues? The fact that the refinery is broke and perpetually broke, and two, the fact that nobody respects and trusts the refinery. Here is where we have a challenge there. We think that because they went about this the wrong way, using single sourcing, not ensuring transparency, not doing international competitive tendering, the fact that the promoters behind it are not well known in the energy financing and operation space. They may have done other things elsewhere, but they are not very well known in the industry. And typically when you're doing an SPV, it's the people behind the SPV that matter, because the SPV is just a shell company. So every focus is on who is the one promoting that SPV. And none of the people that we've found out are behind it have that level of trust in the industry as major operators. Thirdly, where they say they will get the crude from brings up all the issues that I've discussed about shady crude being brought to Tor in the past. They have a company called Pontus Trading. Our initial due diligence suggests that Pontus Trading has big issues in Sri Lanka. Some affiliate of it appears to be evading U.S. sanctions. There's a lot of murkiness about Pontus Trading, which they've not come out to be able to explain properly to anybody who is doing due diligence now. And there's a number of due diligence processes that are ongoing, none of which have been very favorable. The last bit, which is very important, is that the capital sources are not clear. I mean, if you're doing an SPV, your ability to raise money is important. And the way we've looked into things, the government has proposed a company called Legacy Capital as potential source of money. When we do our limited due diligence, it turns out that this company has been accused of having, or at least the founder of this company has been accused of having links with the Russian mafia. Too much murkiness. Secondly, they keep changing the name of the entity. So they started off saying it was Decimal Capital.
Right.
Then the person who was promoting Decimal Capital got into trouble with the American government for apparently, at least according to the American government, bribing Ghanaian government officials. Therefore, they changed the name of the entity and then they transferred the capital to, the shareholding to another director and created a new entity that they were then calling Bay Bridge. Then they created another entity called Torinco. It's just a messy shift in terms of identity and things like that. So what are we saying? What we're saying is that private sector participation is essential. Where Tor is now, with Central Refinery about to come on board with 120,000 barrels, it will be, a miracle if Tor survives. But if it's to survive, it's going to require private sector participation. We don't dispute that. So on that leg of the strategy, we agree with the government and with the Tor board and management. Also, we don't run the Tor board and management, right? We don't run Tor. If the board and management says this is their best they're going to get, we have to give them some benefit of the doubt. But here are our issues. One, you need more trustworthy consortium partners, people that are known. They've mentioned Vitol. When we've checked, Vitol have said we don't have a contract with them. We've not decided on anything yet. We are just waiting to see. That is not very reassuring. The source of working capital has to be better identified. So we don't have situations where people use, sanctioned money and things like that to come in, because that will worsen Tor's reputational issues. The amount that they say they're going to spend to revamp the refinery, $22 million, seems completely at odds with everything we've been told about Tor in the past. So why do they believe that $22 million will be enough? The fees that they are proposing to pay, when you analyze it, it comes down to less than what Tor was making in 2021, when the management said it was too little and shut the refinery down. So why is this all of a sudden useful? And lastly, the workers, the new, I say they will do a secondment agreement, which is fine, but the secondment agreement is not clear whether they are taking all the 480 or 500 or so workers that are Tor now, etc. So our argument is pretty simple.
All right.
There has to be better transparency and accountability, more money injected in, and an effort to fix the issues at Tor fundamental, which means government clearing the debt. So those are our issues with the...
Thank you so very much. And as we understand, there are issues, but this is a company that has been making losses. It has not been known to make any profit. This is a company, and as we know, familiar with our state-owned enterprises in Ghana, square pegs, round holes, almost all the time, just a few. The kinds of Dubik Mahames and Alex Mold sitting here, very rare to find in the state-owned enterprises. And all they do is to plunge us into debt upon debt. And we continue to watch. There is so much corruption, like the trust issues with Tor. How is this missing things and always all the time? It never changes. Well, so how come that a new as it were, the interim management committee that was set up in 2021 June to oversee this process. There were, as we understand, they received 2 proposals from local and international companies. The companies, as we understood, were Intercontinental Energy Dubai and Africa Finch Dubai. The expression of interest continued, and the board of directors, as it were, eventually, this is where we are. This is where we are, where one company that is being dealt with, beginning with Decimal Capital, which, as Bright mentioned, a former head or a former boss of that entity, was said to be the one fronting it, and he had issues with the US government as far as some criminal processes are concerned. So he left the entity, and then these other entities are coming up, but it is understood that they all have these people behind it fronting, perhaps for some, politicians and so on and so forth. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back and hear from Alex and also Ejapa Mensah, who should join us by now. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. Alhaj Suleiman says, while I love the ECGC CEO for his affability, it is not right for him to say, because Bright's graphics graphs are up to 2019, they are outdated. No. In statistics and analysis, 2 time points are a good basis to project into the future and even back project into the past. Bright has shown over 10 time points in his analysis. Alhaj Suleiman, thanks for your message. Do Hoto says, I wish all CEOs and directors of SOEs will be truthful like the managing director of ECG, Mr. Mahama. He admits the ECG has problems and is putting in measures to address them. We are seeing improvement. Kudos to Mr. Mahama. Desmond Israel says the interaction between Alex Mould and the new ECG head is the kind of interaction we need to grow this country. I confess, I was sitting here and I couldn't help but admire, the camaraderie between the two of them and how they went about dealing with the facts. Desmond Israel, you said that. Samuel Lamptey says, I like the new CEO, ECG MD. Looks like he's genuinely working hard and needs all our support to improve things at the company. Such an admirable interaction between him and Mr. Alex Mould. Lovely stuff. Then at King Gaius 77, the ECG MD, Mahama, is really a solid guy. For what meets the eye, the man is up to the task. I pray he succeeds. No unnecessary politics. And finally, Honorable Edu Tete says, this ECG man is the only one I have seen speak about issues without politicizing. He looks better, serious, and ready to serve. A leader that is worth his leadership. All right, all of you, thank you so very much. So somehow they abandoned the issues and they're looking at the two of you and how you were, interacting and praising, because when you do right, we see. So what do you say about this Torenco deal for the tour?
Well, Samson, something has to be very clear, and we'll get back to this. I'm going to make a statement, and it's that most badly managed or politically controlled SOEs that have weak management, CEOs and boards, are drawn into certain transactions that extract value for certain individuals who have huge influence in governments at the highest level. This is state capture. We saw it in PDS. We've seen it in different transactions making, and this is the latest. We saw it in Gold for Oil as well, and we are seeing it in this Torenko transaction. Now, anybody who has done refinery economics before knows that the value of your products that you produce from the crude oil has to be far higher than the cost of the crude oil and your operating costs, your consumption and losses in the refinery. Otherwise, you're going to make losses. Now, Tema Refinery has been making losses for one reason and one reason only. Its consumption and losses, which should be less than 5%, far exceed 12 to 14%. No refinery on this earth with consumption and losses, that means the fuel you use to heat up the refinery and work, and the losses that are permitted, can go above 6% or 7% in modern times. Because it's a very competitive market. The crude oil, the petroleum product sale market is a very competitive market, and you don't make large margins. So you have to be efficient. The reason why Tema Refinery has been making losses, and many people don't know this, Tema Refinery was a tolling refinery up to 1996. Tema Refinery never made a loss till 1996, when it started buying its own crude oil, stopped the tolling agreement with GMPC, who was the only BDC then, and they started producing on their own. From that day, they started making losses because they did not have the capacity to do that. Now, if you look at the transaction itself, we know that due diligence has not been done on this transaction. The transaction is murky, so sourcing has not been open. And one of the things that you do in a transaction, you have to have the strength of the off-taker. They have to have the credit worthiness to be able to pay when you produce the product. You also have to have the financial backing to be able to buy the crude oil. You also have to have an understanding of the Tema Refinery operations and its losses. Now, the biggest issue in Tema Refinery right now is the operations. Tema Refinery will start and shut down within a few days. It takes 48 hours and fuel. That costs a lot of money to start up the refinery again. But it will get faulty in a few days because a process audit was done in 2016 by engineers who came up and told us exactly what needed to be done in Tema Refinery so that our processes and our instrumentation and our tank farm and all the piping and our gantry would operate in a continuous basis. We have not spent that money. It's going to take us $300 to $500 million to get Tema Oil Refinery in a position where it will make the refinery make profits. Now, looking at this deal, I just saw $22 million they wanted to spend. In this refinery, where did they get that number from? That's why I say the due diligence has not been done. This transaction is just an extraction transaction to extract some value, bring in crude oil at high prices, and make losses at Tema Refinery without Tema Refinery getting better. We want a partner that is going to make Tema Oil Refinery better. That is going to make our refinery be able to work continuously. Refineries work continuously for 18 months before they shut down. Yes, there will be some hiccups here and there. But if a refinery doesn't work continuously, it's going to make losses. So my thing is that due diligence has not been done. I heard Bright saying that private sector participation undoubtedly and undisputedly is going to happen. And I think, yes, it's going to happen because I don't know where government is going to get $300 to $500 million from taxpayers' money because no bank is going to finance this if there's no skin in the game. If the government doesn't put money in, no financial institution is going to finance it. The financial institutions may finance the financing of the working capital, which includes crude oil and the money needed to pay workers and other things on these operations. But the money that is going to be used to revamp the Tema Refinery has to come from equity holders. Government may, and the reason why it hasn't happened is because government hasn't been able to get $300 or $500 million to inject it to Tema Refinery. And they have to make a decision. When I mentioned it the other day, somebody said, I said we should privatize Tema Refinery. We should inject money into Tema Refinery through equity. How is that going to happen? Is it going to happen from a lease? Is it going to happen from privatization? Or is government going to use its own resources, taxpayers' money to do that? That is the conundrum that the government faces right now.
Right. So the CSOs raise CSOs, I meant. I thought I said SOEs. They raise issues, and you see at the start, the reason I say they seem to smell a PDS is that you see almost everything like the PDS situation, and they made noise. They did everything. Government simply ignored them and proceeded, and then had X, in its face. Now,
and why do you think so? There's only one reason. There are people high up in government who are influencing this transaction for one reason and one reason alone, and that's state capture. And this deal needs to be stopped.
What do you know? When they say the former CEO of TOR, Mr. Asante Beko, is the man behind Decimal Capital, which, later on they are now saying, okay, after he got arrested in the UK because the US made a request for his arrest, and he's charged with corrupting Ghanaian officials in a Turkish power plant deal. The suggestion now is that he transferred his shares to Mr. Dakon, Michael Dakon, and I've seen letters, you see Michael Dakon writing as the director and so on, very recent letters too. Are these hardcore facts, or they are just, the Imani and ASEP, as it were, being suspicious? Bright, if you can, I should be directing that question to you. Hello, Bright.
Hello.
Yes.
Samson, sorry for that. So, no, it's fact because it's been admitted by the board of Tema refinery. The board and management have confirmed those facts.
So, have you also been able to confirm for a fact that they cannot get what is required? What you talk about, what's the fund again? The need to be assured of the money that they need to invest. How do you confirm that, they don't have it? Did I lose Bright again?
Sorry, because there have been due diligence efforts to try and establish the source of funding, which have not been successful. And we know that because, obviously, we have our sources within TOR.
Okay. I think Bright needs to take leave of us. If you have to leave us, thank you very much. However, let me go to Ejapa Mensah if he's back with us, and to hear how government feels about all of this, because this is TOR that is leading the process, but there will be the need for the central government's buy-in. Hello, Mr. Mensah.
Yes, Samson. I've been here monitoring the discussion.
Right.
That was started by Bright with his presentation, and subsequently Alex doing his usual political. You see, I feel rather sad that, yes, there's a transaction that is contemplated. Some questions have come up. And rather than ask those legitimate questions, the sense that I get is the suspicion that somebody wants to, if you like, overreach the state and do something untoward. You make accusations of lack of transparency for a process that evolved from the management through the board, through the ministry, through the State Interest and Governance Authority, through the Attorney General's Department, through the Ministry of Finance, through PPA. And you say it is embroiled in some opacity. When all these state institutions have had a say or a look at the entirety of the process. Why would actors of state, for example, want to take over an asset that, from the presentation that's been made by Bright and the politicking by Alex Moore, is a loss-making entity. Why would anybody want to take over that? And yet, the conclusion is that yes, a private sector participation would be required, because the equity conversation that Alex introduced, where is the government of Ghana going to get the money to invest in TOR, which has all the leakages that we know has been associated with the entity for all these years? I read a statement by one of the CSOs, and the conclusion was really apt, that we all say we want Ghanaian participation in our development space, in our economic environment. Yet, when a Ghanaian puts up a proposal that goes through due process and some traction, then everybody raises a question about the political connection of individuals that are involved. It's really sad. Okay, I have always maintained that yes, civil society by all means raise critical questions, question of capital sources and all that. It's exactly the work that the board and management did, that they submitted through the Ministry of Energy to State Interest and Governance Authority, which by law is the shareholder of TOR, to evaluate and take a decision. So the documents were then submitted to the Attorney General to evaluate. The AG said, look, the lease agreement I've seen, but I want to see the operations and maintenance agreement TOR was written to. They submitted it, it went to the Attorney General evaluated it. And indeed, PPA, when they evaluated the process, said, no, clearly any partnership, any JV, any lease agreement would rather be in the nature of the Public-Private Partnership Act. And so refer it to the Ministry of Finance's Public-Private Investment Secretariat, which is mandated to deal with transactions of this nature, for them to provide a view on it. And that process is ongoing. Yet the focus is on some thinking that somebody wants to, as it were, overreach the state. And I hear Alex make referrals to PDS. What transpired in PDS? The government of Ghana had commenced a process as far back as 2004, I believe, or 2014, when Mr. Mahama was president. PDS and all the entities had been shortlisted under the NDC. The NPP comes, takes over the process from where the NDC had left off, and said that, look, rather than 80-20 in favor of Ghanaian foreign ratio, change the dynamics and make it 51-49, so that the Ghanaian can have a greater stake in the entity. Ultimately, the guarantee that they issue, the company that issued it to back the transaction, comes to say that, look, this did not come from proper authority or custody. As the government of Ghana then results from the transaction. And all of a sudden, everybody is reading wrongdoing in that transaction. I failed to get it. Samson, I was on your show. Recall having a discussion on this PDS, and I pointed out to you the agreement and the power that Parliament had given to the Ministry of Finance to amend sections of the transaction when people were calling for parliamentary approval. You recall? In fact, I recall hearing you subsequently on the Joy FM breakfast show saying that it was when I appeared on your show that you took the liberty to read the entirety of the agreement and that government of Ghana had done no wrong. You recall? Samson, you recall that conversation? And Alex sits there and talks about Go for Oil. What is the opacity about the Go for Oil transaction? What is it?
Okay.
So it's about time that, look, I'm always interested in people who ask legitimate questions. But to try and politicize everything and to read
So it's
because you have that mindset.
all right.
Everybody else has that kind of mindset. And I can assure the good people of Ghana who are listening to us.
Right.
There's nothing untoward that either the board and management, as far as I know, have done. There's nothing untoward that the Ministry of Energy, the Attorney General's part, the Ministry of Finance has done. This transaction is required. The board and staff of TOR who usually raise issues about these matters
Thank
have
you.
all written in paper. And
Thank
the
you.
right thing
Thank
to
you.
be done
Thank
to
you.
ensure that aspect of this country is safeguarded.
Thank you so very much, Ejapa Mensah. We have just like a minute to go. What can you say?
When somebody doesn't have anything to say about a transaction, he goes onto a transaction he knows about. So Mensah, who was a party to PDS,
You have like 30 seconds.
has diverted. This transaction is murky, it smells bad, and it should be rejected by the people of Ghana. And the proper due diligence should be done on anybody who is bringing a transaction to Ghana. And we should have transparency, and most importantly, in such a transaction, you should look at the strength of the off-takers and the strength of the people, the sponsors of the transaction, and whether they have the financial backing to do this. Nothing shows here that they have the financial backing. Nothing shows here that the sponsors are strong, or they even understand refining.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex
They cannot
Kofi
procure the
Mensah
expertise
Mold,
who understand refining to do it on their behalf.
former CEO of the Ghana, of the GMPC, Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President Imani Africa, Andrew Ejapa Mensah, MP Secondee and Deputy Minister for Energy. Earlier, you heard us also engage Samuel Dubik Mahama, Managing Director of the Electricity Company of Ghana, and we also spoke to Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, Director, Programs and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana. I'm Samson Anyenini. This is where we draw the curtains for today. Join us again next week for another edition of Newsfile. My outfit, as always, is by Habil's Couture. If you are looking for the best captains, that is where to go. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.